The kind of tired Colin Mercer carried home on Friday nights was not the kind that sleep fixed. It settled differently. Somewhere below the shoulders and above whatever was left of his patience, and it had been there long enough that he had stopped trying to name it. He was 41 years old. He had been a diesel mechanic for 19 of those years, working for a mid-sized fleet maintenance company in Sudbury, Ontario, where the winters came early and the management turnover came faster. He knew engines the way some men knew scripture, by feel, by sound, by the particular silence that meant something was about to go wrong. He had rebuilt transmissions in -30 weather with cracked hands and no overtime pay, and he had done it without complaint, because complaint had never once changed anything in his experience. And because there was a 7-year-old girl at home named Rosie who needed him to keep the lights on. Rosie's mother, Sandra, had died 3 years ago, a brain aneurysm. She had been 36 in good health, and she had kissed Colin on the cheek at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, and by noon she was gone. There were no warning signs that the doctors could point to afterward. Nothing that could have been caught, or treated, or reversed. There was just the Tuesday morning, and then the rest of Colin's life arranged itself around that absence, without asking his permission. He did not talk about Sandra much, not at work, not to his sister who called every second Sunday from Winnipeg, not to the other parents at Rosie's school, when they made the kind of careful, pitying small talk that people offer to the newly and not so newly widowed. He talked to Rosie about her mother, always, in the specific and ordinary way Sandra deserved. Here is what she laughed at. Here is the song she sang while she made coffee. Here is why she always kept a spare umbrella in the car. But that was different. That was maintenance. That was keeping Sandra present for the daughter, who was starting to reach the age where memories begin to blur. The rest of it he carried quietly. On this particular Friday in late October, he had worked 10 hours on a fuel injector problem that should have taken 6, eaten a granola bar at his workbench at 2 in the afternoon, and sat through a staff meeting at 4 where his supervisor, a younger man named Brendan, had announced that the company was bringing in an outside consultant to evaluate shop efficiency. Brendan had looked at Colin when he said it, or at least Colin had felt him look, in the way a man looks at someone he considers a variable rather than an asset. Colin had nodded, gathered his jacket, and driven to pick up Rosie from his neighbor Janet's house, where Rosie had spent the afternoon building an elaborate city out of cardboard boxes and Scotch tape and announcing the zoning regulations of each district to Janet's largely indifferent tabby cat. He made macaroni for dinner. He listened to Rosie explain, in considerable detail, why the cat had been uncooperative as a civic planner. He read her 2 chapters of a book about a girl who could talk to horses, which was not his first choice of literature, but which Rosie considered non-negotiable, and he sat in the dark hallway outside her room for a few minutes after she fell asleep, because that was the part of the day he allowed himself to feel everything he didn't feel in front of her. Then he put his jacket back on and drove to a bar called The Rafter on Lorne Street, because Janet had offered to sleep over and keep an ear out for Rosie, and because Janet, who was 63 and had known Colin since before Sandra died, had said in the particular way she had of saying things, "You need to go somewhere that isn't this house for 2 hours. Go." He had not argued. Janet was usually right about these things. The Rafter was not a remarkable bar. It had good beer on tap, low lighting, and a policy of leaving its patrons alone, which was all Colin required. He found a seat at the far end of the bar, ordered a pint of something dark, and looked at his phone out of habit, found nothing that required his attention, and set it face down on the counter. He was not there to meet anyone. He was there to sit somewhere that was not his garage, or his kitchen, or the hallway outside his daughter's room. This was, by his current standards, a significant form of recreation. He ordered a second pint he did not especially need, and watched the room in the way a person watches something they have no stake in, idly, without expectation. A group of younger men were celebrating something near the dartboard. A couple was having an argument they were trying to have quietly. The bartender was a woman around his age, who moved with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this specific job for a long time, and had made her peace with it. It was around 9:30 when he noticed the woman at the table near the window. She was sitting with a man who was considerably older, 60, maybe 65, in a suit jacket that fit well enough to be expensive. The man was talking. The woman was nodding in the way that has nothing to do with agreement and everything to do with waiting for an opening that isn't coming. Colin recognized the posture. He had seen it at enough staff meetings to know what it looked like. A person being talked at by someone who had not asked a single question in 20 minutes. He was not the kind of person who made assumptions. The situation might have been anything. A business meeting that had run long. A relative she had complicated feelings about. Something that was entirely not his concern. He looked at his beer. He looked back at the table. The man had his hand on her forearm. Not aggressively, nothing that would make a scene, but in the way that communicates ownership rather than affection. The woman shifted in her seat and moved her arm, slowly, in the way of someone who has already tried this once. Colin thought about it for a moment. He was not a large man, and he was not the sort of person who looked for situations to insert himself into. He was, generally speaking, very good at minding his own business. But there was something in the stillness of her expression, the careful, controlled blankness of it, that he recognized from the inside. He left some money on the bar for his beer, picked up his jacket, and walked across the room. He stopped at the edge of the table. The older man looked up. The woman looked up. Colin addressed her directly in a tone that was conversational and completely unhurried. "Hey, sorry I'm late. Parking was a disaster." He looked at the man across from her with the benign, vaguely apologetic expression of someone interrupting a meeting. "I hope I'm not cutting anything short." There was a pause, the kind that decides things. "No," the woman said. Her voice was even. "Not at all. We were just finishing up." The older man, whose name Colin did not know and did not need to, looked at him with the specific displeasure of someone accustomed to not being interrupted. He said something about following up on Monday. He stood, buttoned his jacket with deliberate slowness, and left. Colin stood where he was until the door closed behind the man. Then he looked at the woman and said, "I'm going to go back to the bar now. I'm sorry if that was overstepping." She looked at him for a moment. She had dark eyes and the expression of someone recalibrating. "It wasn't," she said. "Thank you." He nodded. He went back to his stool. He did not look over again because that was not why he had done it. He finished his beer, tipped the bartender, and drove home. Janet was asleep on the couch with the television on and a true crime podcast she'd been meaning to get to still open on her phone. Colin turned the television off, covered her with the blanket from the back of the chair, and went to bed. He did not think about the woman at the table again that night. He was too tired, and Rosie had a hockey practice at 8 in the morning. The interview had been scheduled for 9 o'clock on Monday morning. Colin had applied for the position on the advice of his friend Trevor, who worked in HR for a regional infrastructure company called Caldwell Northern, and who had mentioned, over coffee 3 months ago, that the company was building out their maintenance division and looking for experienced fleet mechanics who could move into supervisory roles. The job paid better. The hours were more predictable. There was a pension. Colin had updated his resume for the first time in 7 years and submitted the application without telling anyone except Trevor and Janet because he did not want to explain himself if it went nowhere. He had heard nothing for 6 weeks. Then he had received a call from someone named Helen in HR who told him the hiring committee was interested and would he come in Monday at 9. He had said yes and spent the rest of the evening helping Rosie with a school project about the water cycle and not thinking about the interview until she was asleep. He dressed carefully on Monday morning without making a production of it. Clean slacks, a button-down shirt that he ironed on Sunday night while Rosie watched a cartoon. His good jacket that he kept in the back of the closet for occasions that required a jacket. He dropped Rosie at school at 8:15, stopped for coffee, and arrived at the Caldwell Northern offices on Regent Street 12 minutes early. The building was glass and gray stone, the kind of deliberate austerity that companies use to communicate stability. He gave his name at the front desk and was directed to a waiting area on the 4th floor with low chairs and a view of the parking lot and a coffee machine he was too nervous to use without spilling something. A young man from HR named Darren came to collect him at 9:05 and walked him down a carpeted hallway to a boardroom with a long table and 4 chairs on one side and one on the other. 3 people were already seated across from the single chair. Colin shook hands with a man introduced as Ted Bryce from operations and a woman introduced as Sheila Park from finance. And then the third person stood up to shake his hand. Her name, Darren said, was Adrienne Lau. She was the director of fleet infrastructure for Caldwell Northern. Colin shook her hand. He recognized her the way you recognize something you weren't expecting to recognize. A fraction of a second behind where recognition should be, with a slight reorganization of the information available. The dark eyes, the very controlled expression, the particular quality of attention. She recognized him too. He was certain of it. But her face gave nothing away, and she sat down again and placed a folder in front of her with the straightforward efficiency of someone who does not intend to deviate from the agenda. He sat down across from them. Darren from HR closed the door. "Thank you for coming in," Adrienne Lau said. Her voice was exactly as even as he remembered. "We've read your resume and your references are strong. We'll be asking you a series of questions this morning, behavioral and technical. I'll start." She did not look at him any differently than she looked at her folder. He appreciated that more than he could have articulated. She asked him about his diagnostic process for intermittent faults. She asked him about his experience managing parts inventory under budget constraints. Ted Bryce asked him something about scheduling and shift coverage. Sheila Park asked about documentation practices. Colin answered each question in the specific, undecorated way he answered most questions, with the actual information, in the actual order it was relevant, without filler. He was not performing. He was too experienced at actual work to perform it convincingly, and too tired of performing in general to try. Then Adrienne Lau set down her pen. She said, "I want to ask you a situation-based question. Not hypothetical. I'm going to ask you about something real." She folded her hands on the table in the unhurried way of someone who has planned this question carefully. "Tell me about a time you saw something that was clearly wrong, that was not your responsibility to fix, and what you decided to do." The room was quiet. Ted Bryce was looking at his own notes. Sheila Park had her pen ready. Colin looked at Adrienne Lau. He thought about Friday night. He thought about the parking situation he had invented. He thought about the specific quality of stillness in her expression at that table, and how he had recognized it, and why. He thought about Sandra. He said carefully, "There was a situation recently, at a public place. I could see that someone was uncomfortable, not in immediate danger, but in the kind of situation where the discomfort was being ignored by everyone present, including the people who should have noticed. It wasn't my business. I didn't know the person. I had no particular reason to involve myself." He paused. "I got up anyway. I said something simple. I didn't make a scene and I didn't take over the situation. I just created enough of an opening that the person could make their own choice. Then I went back to what I was doing." There was a silence. "Why?" Adrienne Lau asked. Colin thought about it honestly, the way he thought about things he actually meant. "Because my daughter is 7, he said, "and the world she's growing up in is going to be mostly made up of the choices that people like me make in moments like that. I'd rather she inherit something worth inheriting." Ted Bryce wrote something down. Sheila Park looked at him with the expression of someone reassessing a number. Adrienne Lau did not write anything. She looked at him steadily for a moment. Then she said, "One more question." She picked up her pen and set it down again. If you had known, when you made that choice, that there were professional consequences attached to it, positive or negative, would you have made the same decision? Colin understood what she was asking. He understood it more precisely than she perhaps knew he understood it. I wouldn't have known what the consequences were, he said. I didn't know anything about the situation except what I could see in front of me. So yes, same decision. Adrienne Lau nodded once and wrote something brief on her notepad. She folded the page over before he could see it. The interview lasted another 40 minutes. There were technical questions about fuel systems and fleet tracking software that he answered with the confidence of a man who had been doing this since before the interviewer's company existed in its current form. Ted Bryce loosened up around the halfway point and asked him something about a specific engine configuration that turned into a 10-minute conversation that Sheila Park politely interrupted to keep things on track. At the end, Adrienne Lau shook his hand again at the boardroom door. She said, "We'll be in touch by the end of the week." She did not say anything else. She did not need to. There was a particular quality to the handshake, brief, professional, complete, that communicated everything a professional handshake is capable of communicating, which is not nothing. He walked back down the carpeted hallway with Darren from HR, collected his jacket from the waiting area, and took the elevator down to the ground floor. Outside, the October sky was the pale, impersonal gray of a season that has not yet committed to itself. He sat in his truck for a moment before starting the engine. He was not a man who analyzed situations extensively after the fact. Experience had taught him that most things become clearer by simply waiting. But he sat for a moment with the quiet that the morning had left behind. He thought about the question she had asked, the real one, not the technical ones. He thought about how he had answered it. He thought about whether he had meant what he said, and found, with the straightforward honesty he applied to most things, that he had. He thought about Rosie, who was probably in math class at this moment, negotiating with fractions, absolutely certain of her own position on the matter. He started the truck. He did not hear from Caldwell Northern on Tuesday. He worked a full shift and came home and made chicken soup because Rosie had a cold. And soup was what Sandra had always made for colds, and some practices hold even after the person who started them is gone. He heard from them on Wednesday afternoon. A call from Darren in HR, professional and brief, offering him the position. He said he would like to accept. He called Trevor, who said he had told him so. He called his sister in Winnipeg, who said she was proud of him and meant it. He told Janet over the fence in the backyard while Rosie chased the last of the autumn leaves around the grass, and Janet said nothing, only looked at him in the way of someone who has watched a person carry something heavy for a very long time, and is glad to see them set it down, even partially, even for a moment. He told Rosie at dinner. She considered this information seriously in the manner she applied to most new information. "Will you still pick me up from school?" she asked. "Every day," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her soup. He did not see Adrienne Lau again until his third day at Caldwell Northern, when they passed each other in the corridor outside the operations room. She was walking with someone from the engineering department and had a binder under one arm, and the expression of a person running 4 minutes behind schedule. He was carrying a cup of coffee and a maintenance report he hadn't had a chance to read yet. They made eye contact for a moment in the way of two people who share a particular knowledge that the corridor does not. She gave him a brief nod. He gave her one back, and then they both continued in their respective directions, because there was work to do, and because the foundation of the thing, whatever it was, and whatever it might eventually become, had already been laid on a Friday night in late October by a man who had done the right thing for no reason except that it was the right thing, and that has always been reason enough.